than 1 billion people will survive in the most precarious situations. And we're talking about 6 to 7 billion people in the world dying. That's reality what we're talking about. And I work at the international climate negotiations. And people always ask, so what is it? How are they talking about climate? And I say, the last thing people are talking about is climate. Actually, the fight that's going on and the debate that's going on is about political economy. It's about who has power, who doesn't have power, who will have power and who doesn't. And at its most basic, it's about who's going to have the right to life, who's going to have the right to live. And as you see from the US who talks, the Todd Stern, who's the former lead negotiator, he last year said something very, very telling. He said everything's up for negotiation apart from the one thing. The one thing that's not up for negotiation is the American way of life. And what he's basically saying is what's not up for the way of for negotiation is a consumption and production model. It's not, capitalism is not up for negotiation, for discussion. And we know that fundamentally the climate crisis, it's great, we can do all sorts of brilliant things. We can change our light bulbs, we can shop ethically, we can do all of those. But if we want to stop this climate crisis, it's a system change that we need. That's fundamentally what we need to be able to do. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to talk about a positive vision. I don't think it is just about saying no, and I think that's one of the problems of the climate movement. The climate movement has not put forward a positive vision. We've always told people what you can't do. It's going to be hard, we should not be doing this, we should not be eating meat, we should not be doing all of those. We actually can portray a much more positive vision of the world. A vision which is fairer, greener, more sustainable, equal, a better world. A world where actually 3/4 of the population aren't living in poverty, where 1.7 billion people don't have access to energy, where people are dying because they're burning solid fuels at home, and more people are dying because of black carbon than TB or malaria. I mean, the struggles that are out there and the issues that are out there are actually the bread and butter issues. And relating it back to this country, relating it to, I think, why climate has to become a working class issue. And one of the biggest problems is that the environmentalism and the climate crisis have been seen as a white, liberal, middle class issue, divorced from the struggles of ordinary people. And people have thought about it only in terms of advocacy. And so if you produce another report that showed what was going to happen, governments somehow will make the right decision. Governments know what's going on in terms of the climate crisis. They have the reports. You could fill bloody the whole Truman Brewery about 10 times over with the amount of reports that tell you what's going to happen. This year we've had the world's climate scientists produce 3 reports, one on the climate science, one on the impacts, and one on what kind of mitigation action needs to be happening. All of them are saying you need more ambition, it needs to be much more urgent. And what we're seeing government going heading the other way. We see even our own government, this government that claims to be the greenest government that is basically giving over $2 billion in tax subsidies to big dirty energy to the fracking companies. That's allowing fracking companies to be able to, frack wherever they want, take away fundamental rights. But what we have to do, and I'm going to speak very, very quickly now. What we have to do is, of course, this is not an issue about the North or the South, and again, that was one of the problems. People talked about the climate crisis of, in the North, we had to act in solidarity, we were acting on behalf of the poor Bangladeshis who were about to drown. No, we're all going to be fucked. Yes, some of us are going to get fucked first, but we're all in the same aeroplane. So when that aeroplane is coming down, you might be in the first class, but ultimately everybody's going to go down in the same way. So we all have a common struggle here. And this is actually a moment when we can actually turn back the clock in terms of trying to talk about a narrative and talk about a way that connects all of us at a global level. And we have to grasp that opportunity. And that means we have to talk about really fundamental issues. There are, I think, 3 things, which is how do you consume and produce energy? Who and who owns it? We have to switch away from dirty energy towards community and controlled energy systems. That's good for us, it's good for communities, it's good on every single level. It breaks the power of big corporations. We have to change the way we consume and produce food. So again, very, very simple. We know we have the solutions out there. The UN Food Agency tells us that agroecology, sustainable agriculture, not only can feed the world, but actually can cool the planet as well. Instead, what are we having? We're having big industrial agribusiness that wants to continue business as usual. And the problem is, is that they want to continue to pollute. And this week I read something amazing, which was about the Australian government is pitching now and saying coal, we need coal because coal will deal with poverty. I'm about to shut now. I think I'm passionate about this, and I have to say, I'm totally a reluctant environmentalist. You know, my background is from social justice, anti-racism, lots of different movements. I always thought the environmental movement, a bunch of white liberals, it was something for me. But when you look at the climate crisis, we realise that this is the fight of all fights. This is the fight around power and justice. And if you want to fight about justice, this is where we need to be able to fight. And that means creating a narrative and having this conversation. And really, I was listening to the discussion and I was thinking, well, actually, you don't need me to speak because everybody's saying the right things. We know what needs to happen. We need to be able to, but the thing is, we need to be organised. We need to be organised because we need more power. That's what we lack. Fundamentally, this whole question about climate crisis is we don't have enough power. We don't have enough power because we don't have enough people. We don't have enough people because we're not connecting with ordinary communities. We need to connect with those ordinary communities, bring this kind of an alliance together, and we can win the climate crisis and we can create a better world.
Thanks, Maria, and thank you for a fantastic contribution. I want to build a little bit on what you said and start off by talking about how the global recession has basically provided the powers that be the perfect opportunity to continue business as usual with something that resembles a mandate. We've seen a real renewal of the ideological offensive over climate change from the right since the financial crisis. A massive plummet in media coverage, the complete dissolution of any respectable party policy with a few honourable exceptions, and a rise in climate change denial both here in the UK and particularly in the United States. So the incredible scale of the People's Climate March took a lot of people by surprise, including the organisers in New York, I'm told. And I think if we want to try and understand this outburst of opposition within that context, we don't really have to look much further than the spectacular failure of the Copenhagen summit in 2009, which precipitated a real crisis of faith, I think, for a lot of people, that after 20 years of petitioning and protesting summit after summit, building a consensus among 97% of scientists, it had gotten us precisely nowhere. And we were at a point where the only thing that proved capable of reducing global emissions was the financial crash. And by 2009, they were increasing again at the fastest rate that we've seen since the Industrial Revolution itself. And all of this, to go back to what you touched on, is really a reflection of the contradictions at the heart of this idea about green capitalism, which in itself is a product of a bad strategy, this kind of false pragmatism, this thought that climate change is so apocalyptic, so all-consuming, so urgent that what we need to do is table the rest of our politics in order to be in with a shot at winning this one battle. And the problem, of course, with that logic is that politics is the problem. We can see this played out in the long line of market-based solutions, some of which we've discussed earlier, whether it's carbon trading, commodification and privatization of our water, our air. Every single solution that the market has ever given us has managed to enrich the 1%, exploit the 99%, and the climate crisis keeps getting worse. The problem is also, as we said, not research. We know what kind of policies we need, but in order to realise them, we have to be able to speak honestly about the obstacles that we face and call them by their name. We know we need climate jobs and we need to smash big energy monopolies, but as long as investment is under the control of private banks and the politicians that work for them, we can't get it. We know we need a massive global redistribution of wealth, but as long as the IMF and the World Bank reign over international development, we're not going to get that either. We know that we need to develop and distribute green technology, but as long as we have corporate monopolies over intellectual property rights and lack of public funding, we're not going to get that either. We know we need to reduce and democratise and localise production, but that's a revolutionary transformation that we're talking about. Now, for those not already committed to anti-capitalist politics, I think that can probably be quite a depressing realisation, as though it's not a big enough deal trying to keep the rainforest upright, you also now have to dismantle the whole capitalist system. And the left has its own challenges to deal with as well. It's difficult to make the case that the climate is key at a time where we're desperately struggling to salvage what's left of the NHS and everything else that's being stripped away. But there's another way to look at it, which I can't put better than Naomi Klein, so I'm just going to quote her instead. In a speech on why unions should join the climate fight, which made quite a big impression on me, she said, "Far from trumping other issues, climate change vindicates much of what the left has been demanding for decades. It turbocharges our existing demands and gives them a basis in hard science. And the imperative that comes out of that realisation is that the most important task in front of us now is to forge a new alliance, the way we've seen many of the anti-cuts campaigns doing in recent years, between the labour movement and the environmental movement. Because it will take a revolutionary manifesto incorporating red and green politics to resolve this contradiction at the heart of the climate crisis. And there's so many different campaigns doing fantastic work and transitional demands that need to be fought for, but that ultimately has to be the vision, because if there's one thing we've learned from growing up in this age of austerity that we're living in now, it's that none of the gains made for the majority of people within the capitalist system are ever safe. The market can't be tamed. It can be put on the defensive for a time, but beyond that, it has to be dethroned if we want to see a permanent solution. And that alliance is as vital for the climate movement as it is for the labour movement, both of which have their own inconvenient truths to deal with. When it comes to the climate movement, the fact of the matter is the crisis has been allowed to get so bad that for the majority of the human species now, survival is a radical demand. And if we're interested in mobilising the kind of numbers that we're going to need to see real change, social justice has to be the heart of the message. And when it comes to the left, it's true that nature doesn't discriminate, but capitalism does. And we all know the poor will be hit first, hardest, and over time that will only worsen. So if the progressive political traditions intend to keep their promises to the working people of the world, we have to put ecology at the heart of our politics and recognise the scientific reality that we're faced with. Now, the potential in the codependence of social justice and climate justice is massive. And that's the thing that we need to build on. Organisation, of course, is key to that. We have to take green politics back from the global summits that have proven themselves inadequate guardians of it, to say the least, and bring it back onto the streets. Make it relevant to people in our local communities, whether they're being flooded, fracked, or hit with rising food prices. We need unions with the foresight to prioritise the environment, and a climate movement with the courage to be political, and we need it now. Thanks.
Nursed and nourished us as humans for our growth and development, and more recently there has been an obvious decline in the quality of our environment. Now I'd like to highlight the case of Bhopal. Almost 50 years ago, US-owned Union Carbide looked into the city, sitting in the heart of India in the middle of a railway system. The company also looked to the large lake, a reliable source of water, and to the plentiful electricity and labour. This was ideal for implementing a large-scale industrial plant to formulate pesticides. For the Indian government, this was also ideal. India had recovered from a great famine. A venture like this supported the Green Revolution to increase productivity of crops and saving the country from relying on imports, while supporting industrialization. In 1984, this very same Union Carbide plant would become the site of the greatest industrial disaster we have ever seen. On December the 2nd, it began leaking 27 tons of deadly MIC gas. None of the 6 safety systems designed to contain such a leak were operational, allowing the gas to spread throughout the city of Bhopal. The gas crept up on people in their sleep. In those apocalyptic moments, nobody knew what was happening. People started dying in the most hideous ways. A survivor, Mrs. Shukla, recalled, "The poison cloud was so dense and searing that people were reduced to near blindness. The gases attacked their nervous systems. People lost control of their bodies. Urine and feces ran down their legs. Women lost their unborn children as they ran, the womb spontaneously aborting." Rashida B., another survivor, said, "The lucky ones are the ones who died that night." But why would she say that? After the 10,000 who died that night, now, today, we see more than 120,000 still suffer from chronic ailments caused by the gas. But many thousands more are being affected as the plant was never fully dismantled. The site has never been properly cleaned up and was simply abandoned. Every monsoon, there are chemicals washed into the water and into the grounds of local communities. Thousands of people are forced to drink water they know is poisoned. Poisons that now flow in people's blood and mother's milk. There is also the business and politics. The Dow Chemical Company purchased Union Carbide in 2001, thereby inheriting both its assets and liabilities. Dow maintained that a settlement was fulfilled for the liability of the gas tragedy with the government of India in 1989. Whilst this is true, this settlement does not and never has covered any liabilities arising from subsequent and continued contamination of the contaminated groundwater. This is Bhopal's second disaster, and contamination levels are increasing over time. Resistance to the injustice has been demonstrated locally and globally since 1984. The best-known individual activist is Satyush Sangari, who founded several activist groups, as well as the Zimbabwe Clinic, a clinic for gas-affected patients where survivors are offered free medical care through Ayurveda, yoga, and Western medicines. This is supported by the Bhopal Medical Appeal. Numerous local actions have also been performed: demonstrations, sit-ins, hunger strikes, marches, combined with pamphlets, books, and articles. Every anniversary actions are performed. Often, these include marches around Old Bhopal. Cooperation with international NGOs, including Pesticide Action Network and Greenpeace, both started soon after the tragedy. One of the earliest reports is a trade union report. Important international actions have included tours in Europe and the United States, marches to parliaments in Delhi, all including hunger strikes, and the Bhopal Europe bus tour in 2009. The Bhopal Medical Appeal is just one of the important organizations campaigning for justice and raising funds for survivors. So how can you participate? You can spread awareness, telling everyone what I just told you, also calling on Dow to deal with adequate compensation claims and provide resources to clean up the sites. You can host awareness fundraising events. You can take part in sponsored events. You can join us at one of our events. You can even offer your time to volunteer in Bhopal. I'm willing to discuss any of these with you afterwards. This year there is a lot of activity forthcoming as it is the 30th anniversary of the disaster. But this December is not just an anniversary. We're using the milestone year as an opportunity to tell people of the continued disaster and to be heard, and to enable air, water and land to nourish humans in Bhopal again. Thank you.
And the kind of inspiring thing for me about the fact that lots of people are marching from the TUC march is that all too often we kind of divide and rule ourselves. You know, you've got the kind of direct action people over here and they're kind of snooty about the marching people, and then you've got marching people over here and snooty about the direct action people. And actually one of the most depressing things when Occupy happened the first time, we got one slot on Channel 4 News, we never got on Newsnight. And that one time, it basically ended in a sort of slagging match between a guy from the NUS who was going, marches, marches, and the guy from Occupy was going, direct action, and it's just, you know, that was such an ironic representation of the biggest problem that we have, which is actually getting together. People have talked for the last 15 years about the movement of movements, and it's an inspiring thing. You know, there are millions of different, about 1 million different groups across the world fighting against all sorts of terrible injustices with a fairly similar vision of social justice. But what we haven't done is worked out how to kind of coordinate those movements enough that they can really challenge what is an effectively very coordinated power system. And it doesn't, the thing about the power system that we have is it doesn't really, I mean, it does quite a lot of conspiring. You know, there are a lot of these kind of big global meetings where the super powerful get together and decide stuff, but a lot of the coordination of that power system is about shared economic interest. So what we have to do is actually kind of lever the mainstream conversation in such a way as the things that most people already agree with actually start seeming plausible, and that's something I think is really important to remember. We don't have to radically change everybody's minds. If you look at Owen Jones's new book, talks about the various policies that UKIP members actually support, and your average UKIP member is significantly to the left or to the progressive side of the average English person. You know, they believe in certain circumstances that rent controls and price controls are a good idea, we should nationalise energy and the postal service and the railways, etc. but they are essentially being very well lied to by a media that is very happy to support UKIP. I just did that politician thing, so. Yeah, I mean, they're very well lied to. UKIP is supposedly the anti-establishment party, and actually they're paid for by right-wing millionaires. They're just sort of more Tory than the Tories. So our job essentially is to bring together a movement. Okay, I haven't mentioned climate change. I can have 1 minute before the speech. So to link this with climate change, as Naomi Klein's book makes really clear, we are on an unimaginably lose-lose trajectory. In case anyone wasn't here, for the first half of the session, as Asad makes clear, even the World Bank is saying that we're threatening to lose 80% of the world's population if we get to 4-6 degrees of global warming. It is that spectacularly bad where we are, and what makes it even worse is that, again, according to even the World Bank and the International Energy Agency, the infrastructure we're set to build in the next 5 years alone will be enough to take us over that 2-degree threshold into the sort of potential death spiral zone. So we have a few years to save the world. Now, the great news about that, in terms of progressives, is that we broadly progressives have argued for hundreds of years about sort of the radical reform thing. Do we have hugely speedy change and try and have a revolution, or do we do it from the bottom up? The great thing about the dimensions of the climate crisis is that all of that stuff is taken away from us. We have to transform the world incredibly quickly. And if we want that to be in a way that A, has any chance of dealing with climate change, and B, doesn't end up with an incredibly horrible place where it's all for some and none for anyone else, we have to bring about a sensible democratic revolution. But as I say, not just UKIP voters, but the majority of people are to the progressive side of all the main parties in terms of what they actually believe, even though they're being propagandised by the mainstream all the time. They think rampant inequality is crazy, we shouldn't destroy the world for our children, we shouldn't fact the countryside, etc. So the problem is not getting people to believe in an alternative would be a good idea. The problem is creating movements that inspire people that we are the ones we've been waiting for. And as Asad said, it's about reversing that kind of amnesia where we've forgotten that all the good things that we do have, we have because millions of people got together and struggled with unity, perseverance and conviction to make it happen. And so the good news that we really need to emphasise is that a much better world awaits if we get this right, and the world that happens otherwise doesn't bear thinking about. Thank you.
It's been a fantastic event, and it's great to have the debate format. It was wonderful to talk to a few of you earlier and learn a little bit more about why you're here. Because some of you are socialists who have gone to every demonstration that you possibly could have done throughout your entire lifetimes. And some of you have just learned of this idea of capitalism and system change and neoliberalism. But it's really important that we've come together over this issue that's going to build a better future for us all, and that we all believe that we need to be fighting together to make a difference on. Sometimes it takes a disaster for people to take notice of issues, such as the Dow chemical disaster. Sometimes it takes the straw that breaks the camel's back, but sometimes it's the empowerment of people and the empowerment of issues and the coming together of communities that we've discussed before that makes us strive towards a better future and become activists and become game changers and become the very people that build a better future. There have been many people before us that have done that already, people just like you and people just like me. And I think it is very timely to talk about the history of the environmental movement now. We're coming up to the 100-year anniversary of the First World War, and whatever your perceptions of what that war means, those men came home to a country that they'd fought for, the country that they risked their lives for, and felt that it wasn't their country, that they couldn't go to the countryside. And as a result, there was a mass trespass of the Lake District, a place called Kinderscout, that opened up the entire areas and built the whole foundations of national parks. The Lake District isn't something that we often realise that we take for granted, but people fought for our rights to actually get there. People realise this is our country and that we have a right to have access. And it's still our country, it's still the air we breathe. The issues that we're facing in terms of environmentalism, of flooding, air quality, GMOs, all of these issues affect us as people and affect the very world that we live in. Moving on from that, we've had some really powerful campaigns in the environment movement. Even the fact that
Books have been written about the dystopian future that we're creating, about the world that we're in. But not only that, the fact that the law is consistently now falling upon the side of activists fighting for the environment. You've got the Monsanto 9 who went and disrupted an entire Monsanto GMO fields, went and destroyed the entire place, destroyed millions of pounds worth of crops because they did not think that there was a progressive future in having GMOs in the UK. The judge let them go, free, because they're right, there is no space for GMOs in the UK. The Arctic 30 fighting the ongoing battle that we have in the Arctic, all let free because we know, the judges know, the law knows that we're fighting for a better future. I'm not telling you to go and get arrested. I'm not saying that you should be at the forefront of the battle, but be a piece, be a cog in this wheel towards a better future. Hang on one moment, my notes are all... Sorry, I made notes about all the amazing things that everyone else said, and it ended up in the middle of my own notes. We've talked today about voting with your pounds, about this kind of quite little past way of being an environmentalist. The idea that if we vote with our great British pound and get organic food, that we're going to create an organic movement. But the system hides what the environment is to the product that we buy. I actually personally worked on a report for a major fast food company. I don't really want to mention the name because I don't want to get sued, but they wanted to look at how they were going to get lettuce consistently until 2050. There'd been flooding in so many regions where their lettuce farms were, and they felt that they couldn't get a lettuce leaf to go in their burger. They didn't see that future of being able to consistently get a lettuce leaf in their burger. I felt like I came up with some really good ideas, making sure that they worked with their farmers at the bottom of their supply chain, building a resilient community towards climate change. And they were just like, no, Amelia, what we want to know about is, should we be moving our farms to Norway or moving our farms to Scotland? Now that's not resistance, that's not resilience, and that's not the best way to be tackling these these issues. Trying to change the world through capitalism isn't going to work. So, and I think people are becoming more aware of that. In 2007, environmentalism was considered a bigger issue than terrorism for the first time in decades. And there are lots of reasons for that. There was The Inconvenient Truth, which I hope a lot of you have watched. And there's also the Stern report that told businesses and governments and economists that there will be a more expensive future if you keep on with business as usual, that there is no benefit to the economy if you carry on this way, because it will cost millions to reverse the damage that's going to be done if we continue in this way. Now, for those of you that have been socialists for decades and years, then it's a bit ironic that it's the economists coming out and saying, you know what, capitalism isn't working. But, I mean, we've got a Lord Grantham coming out and saying, if you're a scientist and you know the issues, the future that we're going to have if we don't tackle climate change head on, then you should be the people at the forefront getting arrested. This is the point that we're at. It's business, people know the issues, business know the issues, and even the economists are saying that we need to be tackling this head on and that there's no time to wait, we need to be tackling it now. And it's kind of quite interesting being in the Green Party, so I'm considered a watermelon. I don't know if everyone knows the fruit-based analogies of politics when it comes to the Green Party.
Green dress, red light.
Well, yeah, I'm pulling it off perfectly today. So I'm red on the inside because of my socialist background, but green on the outside because I'm in the Green Party. And I think that everyone needs to remember that the environment provides our very foundations of the world. That as a result of the environment, we have food, we have water, we have the very needs for our existence. And then we use the environment as a result of labour to create things, to create services, to create products, which then go on to create the economy. And it's without the environment, there are no jobs on a dead planet. There is no business on a dead planet. There's no economy on a dead planet. So why are we focusing on the economy when there's problems in the environment? Why focus on the economy when the problems run deeper, when we should be tackling those lower levels of the pyramid? We should be tackling the problems in our environment. We should be tackling the problems in social justice to make sure that we're tackling the problems in our economy. I realised that I missed out a really important part when I talked about activists, because I would not be a very good Green Party member if I did not talk about Caroline Lucas. She was one of those other people, an inspiration to me, and I hope an inspiration to other people in the room, that actually has been at the forefront of the battle and has kept up with her principles, stood alongside, linked arms with people fighting fracking. I think it was mentioned earlier that fracking is going to be one of the biggest issues that we're tackling, because we're tackling it as communities. People can see the injustice, people can see the science, and it's become a very real threat. I actually noted down the 5 stages of grief, because I think that we're going through that with environmentalism, and especially climate change. The first is denial and isolation. Climate change, hey? Let's pretend that's not happening. Let's pretend that we can't do anything and just sit on our own and just not worry about it. And the next one is anger. And I think that a lot of people in this room are angry. And I think that we're going to that we can create the power of the stage of what's going through to create a movement. It moves on. It gets a bit more like you move through bargaining, you move to depression, and then you move to acceptance. I hope that we don't get through the whole stages, because I hope that we can prove that as a result of our anger that we can change the system that we're in, that we can change the society we're in. And one of the things I often say is architects know that to build a better future, you need to break down walls. You need to break down paradigms. What paradigms do you want to break down? What world do you want to create the future that you want to live in? Thank you.